Tonight, we're diving into one of the biggest shifts in college sports possibly ever. The NCAA's proposed NIL settlement could change how money flows in college athletics, capping what schools can pay athletes and tightening the reins on NIL deals. But what does that mean for high school athletes, especially here in Illinois and the Chicago Catholic League? We're breaking it all down. How recruiting might shift, how NIL is trickling down, and why high school stars need to be ready now more than ever. Welcome back to the Varsity Voices, part of the Varsity Voices Media Network, where we talk high school sports, recruiting, the Chicago Catholic League, and everything in between. Be sure to like, subscribe, and follow wherever you are listening from, and don't forget to follow us on social media as well. I'm one of your hosts, Joe Frevaletti, and with me, as always, is your other host, Dan Frevaletti. Dan, tonight we are unpacking the NCAA's latest NIL bombshell, the proposed cap on how much colleges can spend on athletes. Sounds like a college issue, right? But not so fast.
Completely. Nope,
yes, not so fast.
It's gonna affect the high school guys and gals.
Yes. Yep, it is. This is going to have a major ripple effect for high school players. Let's get into it, Dan, and what this means, how athletes, families, what they need to do to start thinking differently right now. So what did you think of this recent ruling, Dan? Or I know it's not finalized yet, but it's as close as it can be to be finalized. So I think we can pretty much be guaranteed that this is going to be in place within the next month, I would think.
You think so? You think it's going to be that fast? And just a quick recap. April 7th, it was, what, a $2.8 billion settlement in the House?
$2.8 billion settlement, yes.
Yeah, so that caps the amount of NIL per school, depending on the school, up to 20 plus million.
Let's see, the $20.5 million annually with their athletes starting July 1st, 2025. And I think they said that it represents about 22% of each of the college's athletic revenue. And that cap is going to increase to around $30 million per year over the next decade. So, it is something they put in place that's going to increase from year to year. But it's definitely going to have an impact when you think about some of the NIL deals now, Dan, that are going on in college, right? And when you think about the $20.5 million cap right now, that's not a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about, you hear about some of these kids getting $1 million, getting $3 million, all of that. So as far as the cap for the particular institutions at 20.5, that's just what they can dole out, right?
So institutions can dole that out. So that 2.8 billion is essentially divided, right? Is that how they came to that 2.8 billion, or is that a separate dollar amount?
That's a separate thing. And what that does is that takes care of the kids who went to college from 2016 or 2017 to 2021 before NIL started to be a thing. And that gets them their money.
Damn.
Yeah.
Born too soon.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. And to think, how much would you have taken, Dan, when you were in college? I would have been happy with, 25 grand, 50 grand.
Yeah. Hell yes.
Hell yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Would have been, felt like a hero. Yeah. It was. Yeah. So it is going to be really interesting, Joe. And it's, and I know we'll get into some of the particulars about it, but there's probably still going to be some confusion on that portion of NIL versus outside donation or outside deals that players can make, with other companies or with other people. And and that's something to focus on, because you still may hear some of those big dollar amounts, right? But they might be fall outside of this 20.5 million.
Right.
Do I have that correct?
You've got it correct.
All
And
right.
as usual, the NCAA has got to insert themselves into any of this process as far as, trying to regulate or trying to be a part of it. Because here's what it says about that, Dan. So in addition to that 20.5 million that the colleges dole out to all their athletes, I mean, we're not talking just football, basketball. I mean, we're talking about their whole sports or athletic programs at a particular university. But so immediately it comes to mind that what about any of the deals outside of that? And so what this says is that athletes must report any third-party NIL agreements that exceed $600, which will then be evaluated to ensure that they reflect fair market value and are not used to bypass the established cap. So, and that clearinghouse is going to be run by Deloitte. The NCAA obviously will have a say-so as to the outside NIL agreements, which I feel like is just ridiculous that they're inserting themselves in this process. What it could eliminate is, I was thinking about this today. Think of Cooper Flagg at Duke, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's a freshman. Obviously, he's going to be or would be the first pick in the draft. And people were saying that if Cooper Flagg stayed at Duke for another year, he could probably make $10 million from an NIL standpoint. So what the NCAA just did with this is that they've said, what, Cooper Flagg can only get $5 million maybe from the 20.5. And if he's going to make an additional 8.5 million outside of this, we have to approve that, which I think is just ridiculous. I mean, what do you think of that?
I you're more libertarian than I am. I just don't want it to. I'm not opposed to someone going and make their own deal. What you don't want is what I don't want is just the idea of NIL to create something that is an advantage just for those with rich alumni, and so I mean, which is most schools, I know, and I guess some are more willing to play than others, but there has to be something, to rein it in a little bit, because it's the Wild West now, and so it is. My biggest concern goes back to, you can be a good player on team X, and maybe this shows, because I went to Northwestern. So if Northwestern, I have felt like in some cases that they are the minor league training center for, pick a big school like from
Right.
the SEC or Notre Dame, where there have been several kids. And on the flip side of that, maybe FCS has had kids, or the Ivy League has had kids that leave there and go to Northwestern. I don't like some schools being essentially minor league programs to others. I like that this evens the playing field. I like that. I think there has to be some sort of, rein in on something that outside sources can provide. I don't know if it's some sort of salary cap or something, but I do like the idea of someone saying it's more than a $1 million handshake, so to speak. And the idea again of NIL, name, image, and likeness, back in the day was that, the TV deals, the video games, everything that the universities were making money off of, the players got nothing. And this ruling helps change that. It addresses that. I would like to see, if it's called NIL, then make it be something NIL that is happening even with outside sources of finances. So don't just have it be $100 or $1 million handshake. Does that make sense?
It does to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't necessarily agree with it.
Yeah.
Makes sense
Right.
because when you talk about NIL, and everything to this point with NIL has been the value of an individual athlete and from an NIL standpoint. So for me, when I think about this, and this is why I don't think this has been finalized yet, is that I'll go back to my example of Cooper Flag. His value from an NIL standpoint is a lot higher than a lot of the other athletes, right? So why should he be subject to only get a piece of that 20.5 million and not be able to make outside of the university with other NIL agreements make as much as he can make based on his NIL value?
Well,
Right?
as long as it's based on an NIL value, I don't have an issue with it.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Is what I don't like that's happening is school X, just graduated a shooting guard. School Y has a nice shooting guard, that enters the transfer portal. School X is going to have someone pay that kid $3 million because he slots in nicely with our team. Doesn't necessarily have anything to do with name, image, and likeness.
Yeah. I see that. I see that argument or that other side of it.
Yeah, and I have no issue with those guys making as much as they possibly can, based off NIL. And if it's legit, then go get it. Go get it.
Yeah. Yeah, I see. It's still going to be the one thing that bothers me about this, Dan, is that this hasn't solved anything, right? I think what it does is it's the NCAA trying to put some kind of guardrails around it, which is maybe not necessarily a bad thing, but I feel like they're trying to still insert their influence and say that we're the ones that are going to tell you how much you can and cannot make and how much schools and donors or those NIL sponsors, so to speak, how much they can give to a particular student athlete. I just don't think they can get away with that anymore.
Yeah. If they try and cap it, I think that would cause a problem. If they're just performing some oversight, I don't have as big an issue with that.
Yeah.
But Joe, before we get into how it affects high school and trickles down to us, and we might have a few other things to talk about though. The other part of it was the NCAA agreeing to drop its rule prohibiting athletes from negotiating before they enter college. So
right.
If you as a senior, you got to have your ducks in a row, and you've got to you're going to be doing some negotiation during the recruiting process. Yeah. I guess that does take us to high school, but that's a big deal, and that is why, Northwestern, for example, and I know everyone has hired kind of a player development person or a GM that they have now. And I know that this is also coming, athletic programs hiring chief revenue officers, and people who can look at how the dollars are going to affect it. Because the other thing is that you still have Title IX implications. So, so that money, anything that gets doled out, right now has to be equitable for both sides of the aisle, so to speak. And there are going to be, and I think it's percentage. So it's not like, Cooper Flag gets $1.5 million and someone on a non-revenue generating sport, gets $1 million, has to get $1.5 million as well. I think there are percentages as far as how much, if I read it correctly, I might be wrong on that, but this pie is going to be split up a lot of different ways throughout athletes at a university. And what you'd hate to see, which I think this kind of, might lead to an unintended consequence, is elimination of some sports. And because they don't want to dole it out across all sports, both revenue generating and non-revenue generating. So if there's less non-revenue generating sports, that's more of that pie that can go to football and basketball.
One of the things I read, Dan, and you're hitting on all the right points, I think, is that this, whatever this, if this becomes final, this ruling is that there's some there's some talk out there that this would not be subject to Title IX. So what that would mean is that the universities, colleges would not have to split this evenly between male sports and female sports, right? Or revenue and non-revenue generating sports. And it sounds to me like that's one of the kind of outstanding issues as to why this has not become finalized yet, is they're still trying to figure out what's the best way to do that or to address that. But
yeah, and that was brought up by the Department of Education, which may be no longer. So
there's still a Department of Education.
Yeah, so it might it may be something that I don't know if that makes it moot or what, but yeah, there's a lot. There's and I'd love to be in the room, when negotiations are going on. It'd be really interesting to listen to how things are proposed and what the climate out there is doing to some of these negotiations, and be very interesting.
Yeah. How often would you be raising your hand if you were in that room, Dan? Excuse me. I've got a comment. I've got a question.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's good to be curious, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you, I think you had a good segue, Dan, into how this might affect high school athletes. And you were talking about, the having to set up a chief revenue officer or whatever that might be. But what I think this does is it really will force some of the kind of top level or those high school athletes who are highly recruited and have a lot of options as far as where they're going to school. What I keep thinking about is that their parents and the athlete, they're going to have to hire an agent, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
Yes.
to negotiate all of this, because there's a lot to address here. And I don't think based on where it's at and where it's going, I don't think you can just go into this without having somebody on your side who's really got a good grasp of it and can represent you in a way that's the best way with different colleges or universities. Yeah.
Right, because there's going to be all sorts of bad actors, right, that want to get involved in this and are going to charge. So make sure that, if you're offered a deal, you've got to have that deal reviewed. You've got to know the tax implications of that deal. So you're going to have to keep all sorts of records, regarding those deals. I mean, So it is something that you're going to have to really think about and know your stuff, or else you're going to have people getting, players and families getting taken advantage of.
Yeah. And left behind.
Oh,
because I mean, this is moving so fast, and it's not like it's moving week by week, but with every single one of these decisions, I feel like it puts high school athletes at a disadvantage, especially if they don't have somebody who's advocating for them and also out there negotiating for them. So, I hate to think that every high school athlete now needs legal representation, but I feel like that may be where this is headed at some point.
Yeah, there'll probably be all sorts of lawsuits against whatever is published or ratified into law. I'm sure that we might be years away. I know there might be a final resolution, from the federal judges, but I would expect that there's going to be all sorts of lawsuits that follow that and extend it out a little bit, where it, being prepared. The other thing that people have to be prepared for as far as high school athletes, and we can bring it right to football, is we've talked about it before, a little in depth too, but there's going to be a major squeeze, absolutely a major squeeze on rosters. And just to kind of expand on that a little bit, is the proposal moves to 105 total roster spots, let's say for football,
Right.
be used however you want, scholarship, walk on, however you want to do that. But what that's going to mean is that schools can now, put a priority on transfers, in your college transfers. I mean, if a coach has a choice between a fifth-year senior or to land a proven transfer from another Division I school, rather than take a chance on a freshman, unproven, you have no idea how these kids are going to be. What are they going to do? They're going to take the older player. We talked about rosters getting older. You are going to see that, and 105, while it's up, is still a squeeze. You're definitely going to see less scholarships available for high school seniors, especially when it comes to football.
Yes, I agree.
Do you agree with that?
I do. I do agree with that. Now, the limited funds now versus what's been going on for the last several years, where they're unlimited, right? But I think with limited college funds now earmarked for athletes under the cap, so to speak, is what that means for high school kids. Is I think what the colleges will do is they're going to prioritize sure things, right? From a high school standpoint, athletes with standout film, national rankings, social media clout. So what that means for some of the players at the high school level is they're going to have to start right away when they're freshmen, right? I mean, developing their brand, cultivating their NIL potential, getting their name out there. For athletes who do not do that, even if they may be a top athlete, right, or one of the best, they're going to have to take it into their own hands to make sure that they are on everybody's radar screen from a standpoint of different colleges and what that might mean for them as far as what piece of the pie they get from that 20.5 million.
I wonder if too, Joe, if there will be scenarios where I'm a player that a school likes, right? But I'm not on the first list, or I'm not one of those sure things. Could part of a negotiating strategy that I have is, hey, if I can generate my own NIL dollars, would you consider taking me then? Or if that's even if it's always going to be yes, or if it's still going to be like, I don't know, because if you're there, you're slotted for X amount of dollars, or you have to get a minimum. You wonder if there'll be minimums too. So would players who are subject to the minimum be something where they can say, I'm fine with the minimum, or no, you're not even worth the minimum.
Right. Yeah.
Like you're not even there. It's one of the things that I just thought about. I thought, I wonder if you could negotiate your own deal on getting to a particular school based on your NIL prowess and outside, like a third party.
Well, if you've thought of it, Dan, what it tells me is that yes, it will be something that happens, right? I mean, because there's all sorts of variations out there as far as and different scenarios, which will probably take place, and I could see that honestly being one of them. Some high school athlete who is, maybe they are the top player in their area or whatever, right? But they may not necessarily be a top 100 prospect in the country, right? That all the universities are after. But they may say, you like me, but not enough to give me whatever amount of money. But you know what? That's okay, because I've generated my own NIL in high school, and that'll continue as I go to college. And I'm not going to take up a huge portion of whatever your budget is for your college program. So I can easily see something like that being a scenario, or that happening.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the walk-on scenario, I guess, but But the flip side of that is say that I'm one of those players, but the college really does like me, but not enough. I'm like the last on their list. Can I go and say, if they offer you last on the list, say, I'm sure you can. It's just like a scholarship, right? Because
Right.
you say, hey, I'm getting more money over here. Can they push it? Will it be pushed a little bit? I'm sure it will. I'm sure, yeah, because that scenario that you and I just kind of laid out, you could really see the same scenario in pre NIL days when it comes to scholarships and that,
Right.
but they may just, both sides may have to lay their cards out on the table a little sooner and a little more in a forthright fashion, just be really upfront. And rather than talking about scholarship, which is a nice kind of clean word that doesn't invoke, yeah, there's money behind that, but it's not in your pocket. Now it might be, now there's going to be financial negotiations where dollar amounts are talked about, whether you are top of the top, players, or you're on the fringe. But, I think what we can both agree on is that there's going to be, the squeeze is on. The squeeze is on. So, be careful. Those guys who have offers out there right now, I don't know. I don't want to say run and accept it if you're unsure. It's still a place where you're going to have, but boy, just remember where you are in the big picture, right? And understand that, I've said it for a lot of years about kids who wanted to play college, and kind of that you could see that was the focus rather than the team. Make sure you want to play college football or college basketball or college sports rather than just get to that point. You've got to want to, the goal has to be, I think, and we talked to Jeff Quinn, I think said this, you've got to want to play college football. You don't just want to get the NIL offer or the scholarship offer. You've got to want to play. So when you envision yourself and what it means after that day you sign, whatever kind of deal that is.
Yeah. And I think as you were talking there, Dan, I'm thinking, who's getting squeezed here? And it is the high school athletes, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're getting kind of left out of this picture because, like you mentioned, transfers, colleges will probably be, because they have limited dollars available now from a cap standpoint, they might be looking more at transfers, more of the proven commodity from a standpoint of building their team. I think the high school kids and high school athletes are really going to get the short end of this.
Joe, what do you think about this scenario? When you talk about what college or high school players can and should do, and you brought it up, you're going to have to start networking even more, right? That networking part of it, as far as reaching out to coaches with your film and information, you have got to, would you, if you're a coach, think about the junior college transfer who doesn't do anything. They're a good player, but they're just like, hey, here I am, versus the high school athlete who's really got his stuff together and has a whole strategy, asks great questions about NIL support and recruiting, attends the camps and combines, has a network of mentors and people who are on his side that can give reference to what type of kid he is. I mean, as a coach, I think that's going to be that much. You have to understand as a college or high school athlete that you probably can have an impact, but you got to have your stuff together if you're not one of these top, a 5-star player or let's say 4 or 5-star player. If you're 3-star, there's a boatload of 3-stars out there, and so and a bunch of transfers that might be considered a 3.5 star. So you've got to have your stuff together. It's going to be pretty competitive.
It is. And unfortunately, what I think is going to happen too is that it's going to be very transactional.
Yeah.
I mean, think about college coaches and what they are there for. They are there to win, right?
Yep.
So in the past, before all of this became such a huge issue with NIL and that, I mean, they would take that kid, Dan, that you just mentioned from high school. Like, this kid works his butt off. He's done everything we should. He's got a great network. He's got great parents. He comes from a great program. that all is good, but I think when it comes down to it, it's going to turn into a very transactional type thing where, like, yeah, we love all that, but I don't know how much it does to help me win next year to take that high school senior, right, as a freshman
Great point.
versus this kid who's a transfer from a junior college or a transfer from D1 AA or D2 school who had a great year last year. He's not nearly as good as this high school kid from a standpoint of all those other things you mentioned, but he's going to help us win. So we're taking him instead.
That's going to happen. That scenario, that 9 times out of 10, it's going to be that JC kid. And, it kind of, I don't know, just the discussion kind of disparages junior colleges, and we don't mean to do that. But, the idea is that you don't think it's just going to be your play on the field that is going to have an impact as a senior. You might, that all those things might put you over the edge from another senior that they're thinking about, so maybe that's a better comparison.
Right.
The middle of the road, scholarship level, but middle of the road that has everything buttoned up versus someone who's just kind of unprepared and just says, yeah, I'm a good player.
Yep, I agree.
Wow.
So what do you think about this, Dan? And this may be a positive for high school athletes, but do you think there might be a rise in a lot more activity at the high school level from an NIL standpoint and the NIL opportunities? So if college athletes are facing like this capped compensation, there's a lot of brands out there. There's a lot of boosters out there that have been contributing a ton of money for NIL up to this point. Well, now that's going to be capped, right? Do you think they may shift their NIL focus or part of their funds and NIL focus down to high school stars? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It will probably, because you can negotiate some of those deals before you get to college. Well, and maybe even before that, Joe. Someone who's a stud as a junior or sophomore, you might start seeing NIL deals from that are university based. And I don't know how we have to figure out how that's going to work. If I've got to commit before I can take a college booster's NIL money, or is that too hard to figure out? Is that an easy workaround? Boy, right. There are so many questions, aren't there?
There are, and man, we could talk about this forever, I'm sure. And I know we've done a fair amount of episodes where we've discussed this already, but we'll do more, I'm sure. Because this is something that is not going away. It's changing constantly, and as it changes, it has a huge effect, not only at the college level, but like we're talking about now at the high school level as well. But you just mentioned commitment decision. When I'm thinking about this from a high school level and how this might be affected, but I would think that from a standpoint of when high school athletes commit to a college program, they're going to start committing earlier and earlier. Now, whether or not the colleges have to stand by that commitment, we know how that has gone from year to year. But I think from a high school athlete standpoint, I think they're going to rush to make that commitment, right? Just so they're committed to a college. They're part of their plans, at least at this point. Maybe, that college has a strong NIL infrastructure. They've got collectives, a lot of media exposure, a lot of alumni connections as well. I think some of these top high school athletes, and unfortunately, I keep saying top high school athletes, I feel like the ones who are really going to get left out here are those who are just beyond the top, like you mentioned, those 3-star or 3.5-star athletes at the high school level. I feel like they're going to get left behind. But I do feel like you're going to see a lot earlier commitments from high school students just because of some of the new some of the new information around NIL and some of the limited funds that are going to be available.
Yeah, and if you can make a third party deal without committing, you might see the high school athletes start to make a lot of money, right? If you can be swayed by NIL dollars, and for those of you thinking out there, you're listening and thinking that's what I'm going to do, you got to be really careful, protect your eligibility because it can get a little scary and a little dicey. But yeah, it's Joe. I mean, if we want to put a wrap on it, yeah, mid-level high school prospects, late bloomers, under recruited athletes, those are the ones who are probably gonna face the biggest squeeze.
Yeah, and I think you'll see a lot more flipping. Although we see a lot of that now.
Yeah, could there be any more? Man, I guess so.
But I think if you make a commitment to a particular college and then some other school comes in and gives you a better NIL package, so to speak, or more money from a standpoint of what they have budgeted, even if it's a smaller or like a non-power 5 or non-power 4 school, I think it might give them a little flexibility to be able to pick off some of these kids who just wanted to go to a D1 or power 4 school.
Yeah. Well, a lot of questions still to be answered, but for those who are interested in playing college athletics, make sure you're prepared. We'll keep talking about it. I'm sure at some point it's going to come up. It's going to be in the news, and we'll try and give our thoughts. If you have anything that you'd like to add, please reach out to us on social media. We're all over. We're on everything. So don't hesitate to give us your thoughts. Ask any questions. If there's someone that we should get on, we're good about doing that.
Yeah. I agree 100% with you, Dan, that in your advice to people listening and high school athletes out there is that, they're going to have to take it upon themselves, their parents themselves as well, to really put themselves in the best position, get themselves the best kind of representation, so to speak. If they're thinking that they shouldn't do that, they probably should rethink that, based on where this is all headed and the environment out there right now. But I really want everybody and our listeners in mostly high school sports and athletes within high school sports to think about the ramifications of some of the stuff that's going on and make sure they position themselves in the best way possible.
Yeah, and remember, keep the important things the most important. Your training, be a great teammate, all that stuff still matters. Performance, those are the things that are going to drive everything. So as a player and an athlete, stay focused on what's important.
Yeah. All right. So thank you for listening. As Dan mentioned, I'm sure we'll be talking about more of this as we go forward in some of our future episodes, especially as some of this kind of shakes itself out and gets finalized over the next couple of months. But as always, we appreciate you listening. Make sure you like, you follow, and you subscribe wherever you're listening from. Follow us on social media, and make sure to reach out if you have any questions or comments. But as always, thank you for listening.